The role of government is something that's been debated hotly amongst economists since the beginning of time. Government involves itself very heavily in the economy, whether that's at the micro level or the macro level. We see at the micro level government involving itself in the regulation of companies, the attempt to prevent what are perceived to be market failures. By market failure, we mean that the production levels of a particular product are either above or below what we would like them to be. For example, if a company emits a lot of pollution, it may be producing more than society deems necessary, and so government might step in to try to regulate that specific firm to reduce the amount of production. On the other hand, there might be goods that we would like there to be more produced, but there's no financial incentive to do so. So government might step in and provide subsidies to increase production of certain kinds of products. More recently, we've seen this happen in the area of green technology. At the macro level, government involves itself in a number of different issues. Primarily, they're involved in trying to stabilize the economy, trying to increase employment, increase output, and keep inflation under control. Government deals with taxation, with tax policy, with spending policy. They deal with trying to control the money supply. There's lots of things that governments do at the macroeconomic level. The question is, how much involvement do we want government to have? The schools of thought in macroeconomics in particular simply describe the way people think about how an economy should be structured. And almost every school of thought has some role for the government to play, from the very minimalist on the Austrian school side of things, up through the supply-siders and the Neoclassicals, to a very heavy involvement in the economy for the part of government, whether that be the Marxists or the socialists or even the Keynesians. They view government as having a much bigger role to play in the economy. The three primary schools of thought that look at government, what we may want to consider mainstream schools of thought, are the Keynesians, the Classicals, and the supply-siders. You could almost boil this down to two categories that put the Classicals and the supply-siders somewhat close together. But there is a distinction between those two schools of thought, primarily on the issue of time. The classical school of thought was sort of the original school of thought in economics. This was where Adam Smith, John Stuart Mill, David Ricardo fall into the grand scheme of things. They view the role of government as being extremely limited, almost really basically involving only three things: the provision of a police force to protect private property from domestic invasion, the provision of an army to protect private property from foreign invasion, and the provision of certain goods and services that help to facilitate trade. That was pretty much the extent of government involvement from the classical perspective. They viewed the market as being very responsive to changes in the economy, and the market would adjust. It would adjust rather quickly to any changes that came about. The Great Depression changed this view of thinking because the economy didn't respond, and it didn't respond quickly, at least in terms of increasing employment and increasing production. That's where John Maynard Keynes comes into play, the British economist who essentially changes the entire way that people view the role of government in economics. Keynes said that we can't wait for the market to adjust itself. Instead, what we need to do is we need government to get involved very heavily and very quickly in spending. Governments can spend money in bad times and then pay off any debts that they incur in good times. This is referred to sometimes as counter-cyclical policy. So if the economy is going in one direction, the government needs to spend in order to get it to move in the other direction, to change the direction of the cycle of the economy. And since 1929, the economy has primarily been run by people involved with the Keynesian school. President Richard Nixon at one point famously quipped that we're all Keynesians now, that the Keynesian way of doing things is firmly entrenched. One of the keys of Keynesian economics is that we try to change the aggregate demand of the economy. And we'll explain more about aggregate demand later in the term. Since 1980 or so, we've seen the rise of what's called the supply-side school of economics. It's very much grounded in the classical school, but with some tweaks to try to fix some of the problems of the classical school. Sometimes this may be referred to as the Neoclassical school of economics. And the idea here is that we want to focus our attention on the supply side of the economy. Try to use policies that will help encourage businesses to produce more and hire more people. The main difference between the supply side and the original classical school is that government can be involved in many more details with the supply side school. The main difference between the supply siders and the Keynesians is the part of the economy upon which they focus. The Keynesians focus on aggregate demand, the supply siders focus on aggregate supply. As we move into understanding macroeconomics, the school of thought, the role of government, the way you view government will very heavily affect how you view how things can be changed, how we can manipulate the economy, hopefully to improve it when things go bad.